Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Video games are always evolving, going from simple 2D blocks to crazy characters made of thousands of polygons. As a general rule, we expect games to get more technologically advanced to keep pushing boundaries. Of course, the jump from 2D to 3D has been amazing for the most part, and there was a time where games released in 2D were seen as inferior. However, due to some limitations back in the day, as well as the resurgence of popularity of games that favour the 2D style, a few gaming franchises have actually gone from being 3D adventures to 2D ones, and that's what we're looking at today. There's only one real rule here. The games we're looking at have to have started out as 3D games, which then made the move to 2D. So there aren't any like Sonic, who went from 2D to 3D and then back to 2D. Of course, I often make mistakes in my videos, so feel free to correct me if I am wrong about any of these. Anyway, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Let's start with Crash Bandicoot. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone here is going to be familiar with this one, and rightly so. It's good fun. Released in 1996 for the PlayStation 1, Crash very quickly became the unofficial mascot for the system. It's a 3D platform game where you take control of the bouncy Bandicoot, who was an experiment gone wrong by the evil Dr. Neo Cortex. Your mission is to take the Doctor and his army of other experiments, animals and henchmen down. You travel across a number of lush jungles, temples and laboratories, collecting apples for lives and spinning your way through anything that gets in your way. The levels themselves are all sort of mini corridors, and although it's definitely a 3D game, you don't have free reign of an open world. Most of the time you're running forward, where you'll see all sorts of enemies and obstacles coming towards you to dispatch of. There's boxes all over the place that contain the aforementioned apples, as well as extra lives or a tiki mask. Collecting 100 apples gives you an extra life, and collecting tiki masks lets you take an extra hit. If you collect 3 masks though, you'll put them on and turn invincible for a while, which is pretty damn handy, as the game gets pretty tricky. As you play, more and more enemies are introduced that need to be killed in certain ways. Most of them can be spin attacked, but some have to be jumped on and some need to be avoided altogether. As well as this, the levels are packed with tricky platforming sections, which is where you'll likely lose most of your lives. Narrow pathways, bottomless pits, fire and spikes, and you get the lot here, and they're all very deadly. Some levels also see you running towards the screen, usually away from a hazard or monster. These levels can be tough, but unlike the ones in some of the 16-bit era games, I do feel that you're given enough screen to be able to have a chance to react and not get murdered too easily. There's also levels that play like 2D side-scrollers, making you go from left to right or right to left. You do still have a bit of freedom here, so you can move up and down away from the screen or towards it if you need to, and sometimes you will need to in order to avoid stuff. But they do get pretty tough, especially in the later stages. Graphically, the game is good, definitely showing its age now, and it was a very early PS1 game, and considering that, it is pretty impressive, with some cool animations, and the amount of detail and expression on Crash is really good. The levels themselves all look decent as well, though they are a bit samey at times. The controls are pretty decent still actually, and the game is really fun to play. The 2 sequels did improve on this one in just about every way, but there is of course also the recent remake as well for modern consoles that's really good fun. This is always a good game to pick up and play for an hour or so when you're bored. The very next generation of consoles, Crash stopped being a PlayStation exclusive and found himself on just about every system out there, including the Game Boy Advance in 2002. Crash Bandicoot: The Huge Adventure, also known as Crash XS, is a 2D platform game that ditches the 3D polygons for 2D pre-rendered sprites, but it manages to keep the look and feel of the original Crash games pretty damn well. This time, Dr. Cortex has shrunk planet Earth while out in space, so Crash has to travel the usual assortment of levels in order to collect crystals needed to reverse their shrinkage. I could use some of those crystals on a cold day, you know. So, Crash does what he does best. You have a number of hub worlds, each with their own levels and a boss fight. You have to explore the levels, collecting apples, lives and your mask mate Aku Aku, who will once again let you take a few extra hits and eventually turn invincible when you collect 3 of him. Now the levels here do a really good job of keeping the feel of the PlayStation games, and they play very similarly to the ones that were done in a 2D plane. They're filled with enemies to take out, and Crash has the same moveset that he does in the originals, being able to run, jump, spin and face splat into the ground. There's plenty of familiar enemies here, as well as a lot of new ones, most of them being animal related. You get a few different level styles, like the ones when you're running towards the screen away from something. These are done really well, and I'll be honest, I was surprised at how smoothly they ran. You also get some basic shooter levels where you're flying away from the screen shooting down airships and balloons. Again, these levels are used quite sparingly and, as a result, are actually a nice little diversion when you do get them. The game starts off pretty damn easy, which is actually kind of nice. It definitely eases you in and lets you build up a decent stock of extra lives, also letting you go back to previously beaten levels where you can try and smash all the crates for more bonuses or find anything that you might have missed, just like the original games. But after a few worlds, the enemy placement and tricky platforming section do get a lot harder, and the game puts up a decent but fair challenge. Graphically, I think it looks excellent, with some really good animation, colours and clear visuals. Pre-rendered games can be a bit hit and miss, and I think this is a good example of them. The controls are super responsive and fast, and there are definitely no complaints there. It's easy to get Crash to do what you need him to. And I have to mention the sound and music, which are really high quality. I was very impressed with it all here. I don't always notice the sound and music in games, but here I really did. It's very clear and very catchy. Crash XS, or whatever you want to call it, is a great move to 2D and a fantastic platform game for the Game Boy Advance. I don't ever really hear anyone talking about this game, which is a shame, as it is a lot of fun, and I would highly recommend adding it to your collection. BloodRayne was released in 2002 and sees you playing as Rayne, a sexy vampire lady who has to fight Nazis. This is its sequel, BloodRayne 2, being shown here on the PlayStation 2. Now, I do have the first game on the GameCube, but guess who forgot to press record for 2 hours worth of footage, and now I refuse to play that game again out of spite. Yeah, that's me. There is the usual angsty vampire story here. Rayne's friend is murdered by Nazis in a flashback, and then we're taken to modern times, well, early 2000s modern, where it turns out Rayne is still hunting down and killing everyone connected with the murder of her mate. It's an evil vampire called Kagan, but to be fair, if you call your kid Kagan, it's going to turn out to be evil. Parents are dumb. You've tracked down Kagan to his massive mansion and intend on cutting his face off, but wouldn't you know it, he escapes and has a massive army of vampire and monster henchmen, so the whole game is played out a bit like a cat and mouse simulation, where you go from place to place trying to catch the wily bastard. It's a 3D action game with a big focus on combat. For the most part, Rayne has her knife blade things which are attached to her arms, and you can do various combos with these, and they do a good job of cutting people and monsters into bits, and you learn new moves along the way. And you also end up with a variety of guns, which are more like sub-weapons really. They are quite powerful, but use up bullets and are used more as backup, but they definitely are handy. You also have a cool chain whip thing, which you can use to grab and throw enemies around the place with, either bringing them towards you to kill, or more importantly, throwing them into scenery, namely spikes or other hazards for quick kills. And quick kills here are a blessing, as a lot of the enemies are incredibly tough, and you're almost always fighting 3 or 4 at once. Enemies have melee attacks as well as magic and a variety of guns, and you can't really take that much punishment before you die, which is kinda strange for an immortal vampire, but oh well. A lot of the time, enemies won't take it in turns attacking you either, and it's easy to get ganged up on and surrounded and killed. Thankfully, you are quite agile, so you can run and jump around all over the place to get out of harm's way. Another thing that helps are your various vampire visions. You have one that slows down time, making it easier to avoid attacks, one that puts you in a rage so you deal more damage, and one that lets you see enemies through walls as well as revealing secrets, so you've got a chance to see what's coming up and not get jumped. Oh, and also, being a vampire, to get your health back you'll need to drink blood. You can drink the blood of just about any enemy in the game, though often you'll have to weaken them or stun them first. There's not a whole lot more to the levels other than killing everyone you see, then moving on to the next area and repeating until whatever door or force field that's in the way opens up. But it is kind of fun, though there is a fair bit of jank. It's one of those games where it often doesn't feel like your attacks are doing a lot, and enemies will always continue to attack you through your attacks, even when you're slicing them up. And some of the animations here are very choppy, which can make the combat quite tricky. Some enemies will just block everything too, and this is where you really have to learn to block and counter yourself. Even on the lower difficulty that I was playing on was pretty damn hard, but it was doable. The game looks good enough, it's pretty average for a PS2, and it's not going to blow you away. Of course, Rayne looks all sexy and has some nice jiggle physics, but the character models are all pretty generic. In fact, that's kind of a good way to sum this game up. It is pretty generic. I wouldn't say it's a bad game, but it's actually just painfully average. I do quite like the original better than this one. And both of these games also got a remaster in 2020, which was kind of random. But I would say this is a series that I wouldn't mind seeing get a new entry. It could be pretty good. In 2011, we got BloodRayne Betrayal, released digitally on the PS3, Xbox 360 and Windows. This is the PlayStation 3 version. This time, Rayne has been hired by Vampire Hunting Society to help them take down some evil vampires, stopping their evil plans once and for all and all that jazz. This time though, it's all done in a beautiful 2D side-scrolling fashion. Rayne still has two methods of attack, her trusty arm blade things which are very powerful with a number of combos you can do, and you also have a pistol which has limited ammo. Your blades are your main attack, and you can attack straight ahead, hammering the button does a decent combo, and you can also press up to knock enemies into the air, at which point you can jump and do an air combo and kick them against walls or into destructible things to do more damage and smash stuff up. Your gun only fires one bullet at a time, but this goes through all enemies and knocks them to the ground. It's really best used as a defensive item when you're getting bombarded by enemies, which you often will do. Thankfully, most enemies do also drop bullets for you to pick up. Rayne can also double jump, backflip, wall jump, as well as air dash either on the ground or in the air. You'll need to combine all your moves if you want to get anywhere here, as the game is bloody hard. The gameplay is kind of simple, in that it's just a case of moving until the screen locks and then you kill everything and then you move on. Eventually you fight a boss. But the combat is really tough for a few reasons. Firstly, the number of enemies is always stacked against you, with more teleporting in all the time. You'll often fight a dozen or so at one time. Enemies all have their own attacks and strategies for fighting, being able to block your attacks quite often as well. They're also quite agile, with some being on the ground, some flying, some low down, so you need to jump, duck, crouch, everything to take everyone out. But this is also one of those games where the animation of whatever you're doing has to stop before you can do anything else. Also, all of your attacks make you stop exactly where you are, so you can't really move forward and attack, with the exception of jumping attacks really. So as soon as you press the attack button, you stop where you are, and if you're just a millimetre or so too far away from the enemy, you'll miss them and have to wait a second or two while your animation plays out before you can attack again, and usually by then, they'll have punched you in your beautifully animated tits. This also applies to blocking. You can't interrupt attacks with a block, and it's really hard not to take damage. It makes all the fights very hard even early on. You do get semi-regular checkpoints which refill your health, and you can grab any enemy and suck their blood to get health back, so this definitely does help, but you do get attacked while trying to do this most of the time, so it can be hard to time correctly. In the levels you also find treasure. This is just for points to get better rank at the end of the stage, but there's also red skulls you can find, and for every 5 of these you collect, you can upgrade your health or ammo. These skulls are very hard to find in the levels and they're hidden well, but I recommend health every time. Despite my gripes of the difficulty though, I do find this game pretty enjoyable and fun. As you can see, it looks gorgeous with some amazing character designs and animation, just about everywhere. I love how it looks and animates. There's 15 pretty large, tough levels to play through, and you can go back to any of them at any time to collect anything you might have missed, which is nice. Overall, this is a good game that will definitely challenge and frustrate a lot of people, and not always for good reasons. If you like a challenge, then this is one I would definitely recommend giving a go. Serious Sam: The First Encounter was originally released for the PC in 2001. Here though, I'm playing the remake on the Xbox 360. The Serious Sam games, especially the first and second encounter, are some of my favourite first-person shooters. They are deliberately old school, foregoing any of this tactical nonsense and only carrying a handful of weapons, instead pitting you against literally hundreds of monsters on screen at any time, with a backpack full of rocket launchers, shotguns, miniguns, laser rifles, and even a damn cannon. The games are just so much fun to play, and despite the name, do not take themselves seriously at all. The story is that an evil alien called Mental has sent his forces through time and space to conquer Earth, but they weren't counting on Sam Sirius Stone being a one-man army filled with enough muscles and one-liners to even make Duke Nukem blush. Sam goes through various time periods and locations across Earth, battling Mental's forces with big guns, and it's just so much fun. The levels are all absolutely huge, often taking nearly an hour to get through each. They're packed with hundreds of enemies, with some levels literally having more than 1,000 enemies for you to take out. Of course, the weapons are also plentiful, and there tends to be enough ammo to help you get rid of the bastards as well. The variety in enemies is really cool here. You've got standard soldiers, who are all headless of course, and they've got a variety of weapons and grenades to attack you with. Then there's suicide ones that just run at you screaming, even though they're headless. It's awesome. There's clear skeletons, which sound like horses coming at you, but are actually terrifying skeleton beasts. Then there's Gnars, which are muscle-bound Cyclops monsters, as well as harpies, machine gun-wielding scorpions, robots, were-bulls, and other massive demons. It's great, and they all have their own attack patterns and certain weapons that you have that work best against them. Of course, when you're in the heat of battle, there's often literally dozens of each of the enemies coming at you at any one time, really forcing you to keep moving and switch your weapons regularly, to best deal with the situation. The levels also have a ton of secrets in them. Sometimes it's as simple as a hidden power-up, other times you're taken to a whole new level, or sometimes something crazy will happen like giant enemies showing up, strange creatures that just sort of wander around, or maybe even the developers themselves show up just to annoy you. It's really great, and makes you want to explore the levels quite fully. The first game is all set in Egypt, which can mean the levels get a little bit samey, but the second encounter is set in a few locations, including medieval England, and it introduces a few new weapons and enemies, and is by far my favourite in this series up to this point. The battles are even more epic, and the game is just so fun to play, and of course it's bloody challenging as well. Now, I would recommend playing these games on the PC rather than the console to avoid some of the slowdown that you get here, but my computer sucks. It is a shame, as the whole point of the games is that you get these epic battles with no slowdown, but here on the Xbox 360 there are noticeable frame rate drops in some of the bigger battles, especially when there's water around. For the most part though, the Xbox 360 versions are fine, but you won't have this if you have a half decent PC, and the upgraded graphics on the remake are well worth a smooth frame rate. Even if you do get the original version though, you're going to have a good time. These games look great, play even better, and I would say are a must for any first-person fan. Serious Sam got the 2D treatment in 2011's Serious Sam Double D, which comes bundled with the Serious Sam collection on the Xbox 360 as Serious Sam Double D XXL. This is a side-scrolling shooter that keeps the same basic premise of a Serious Sam game, where you fight loads of over-the-top enemies with loads of over-the-top guns through various over-the-top historical settings to take out Mental's forces. So this one here is a 2D run and gun. Enemies come at you thick and fast, with pretty much all the enemies from the main games making a return, but with the wackiness being turned up to 11 with the designs, especially on some of the new enemies, which include evil pancakes, jetpack monkeys and more. But yeah, as always, Sam has access to a ton of weapons, including chainsaws, shotguns, rocket launchers, just to name a few. But the main gimmick here is that Sam can use two weapons at once, so you can have a shotgun in one hand and a machine gun in the other hand, and on top of that, you also have access to a weapon stacker, which allows you to customize and combine weapons to get you dozens of new attacks. For example, you could stack a chainsaw with a shotgun, and the time displacement weapon. This means that you have a shotgun that slows down enemies when they're shot, and it also has a bayonet on the front, but it's a chainsaw. It's really fun to experiment with these. Not all combinations do something good, but having a machine gun rocket launcher with ricocheting rockets is always fun. Enemies drop ammo, health and money. Money is used to buy new weapons and upgrades from the merchant that you meet at various points in the levels. More and more weapons and mods get unlocked as you play. The levels themselves are all quite large and often maze-like. You'll need to solve simple puzzles like pushing switches and shooting various things to open up paths to progress. You also get items like a portable trampoline that lets you take really high jumps to get to secret areas. Also, the whole game can be played in two-player co-op, which I haven't tried as I have no friends, but I can imagine it would be a lot of fun with some fast, frantic action. I have mixed feelings about the graphics here. While I do like the design of things, it uses that marionette style for how things move, like it's all made out of paper, and I'm not really a huge fan of that, but it does kind of work. It definitely doesn't look bad. I just would have preferred proper sprite work myself, but then again, I bleed pixels. The game is good fun though. It does get very repetitive quite quickly, and it's not a game that you're going to come back to time and time again, but it does have some good moments, and when I first played through it, however many years ago that was, I found that I could just do a couple of levels here and there, and that meant I never got too old too fast. I would say it's worth checking out, and chances are this will be on the cheap or part of a bundle, so yeah, it is worth taking a look. Believe it or not, the original Tomb Raider was released way back in 1996 for the PC, PlayStation and Sega Saturn. This is the Saturn version because I love the Saturn, but I actually originally grew up with the PC version. Tomb Raider was a revolutionary 3D adventure when it came out, the game's protagonist Lara Croft becoming a cultural phenomenon and is still one of the most recognisable game characters of all time, because she's hot and has a giant rack. It's nice to see that not everything changes. The game was a smash hit, and I would say rightly so, and even playing it again today, even though it's a little bit janky, I think it still holds up pretty damn well. The story is that Lara, a Tomb Raider, has to track down pieces of an ancient artifact, the Scion, which will grant the owner some crazy powers. And as you'd expect, evil people are also out to claim it for themselves, so you've got to get to it before they do. This involves raiding a whole bunch of tombs, caves, ancient forgotten civilizations, and more. The levels are massive, open levels that force you to explore every nook and cranny to find keys and items that you'll need. To get around, Lara herself is pretty nimble, and climbing is a big focus here. You can run and jump and grab on pretty much any ledge you can see, and you'll need to do this a lot as there is a massive emphasis on tricky platforming in the game. You'll really need to take the time to look everywhere, and it can be easy to get lost in a level with no idea where the hell you need to go, only to realise you didn't spot an opening high up on a ledge that leads to a new path. This can make some of the levels quite frustrating, but they're almost always rewarding. It's just those water levels. Why is it always water levels? You also have to contend with a ton of death traps. After all, these people don't want you stealing their valuable treasure, so you'll often come across deadly pit traps, boulders that will crush you, spikes, arrows and fire that will all make your life a misery. And if that wasn't enough, the local wildlife also want you dead. There's wolves, bats, bears, crocodiles, lions and even bloody dinosaurs that will rip you to bits if you're not careful. Thankfully, the combat here is still pretty good. You've got a button to get out and put away your guns, then Lara will automatically lock onto an enemy and you just have to hold the shoot button until it's dead and move on to the next one. Your pistols have unlimited ammo, and you also find a shotgun, Uzi, Magnum and some other stuff, but these all run out of ammo, so they should be saved for the bigger enemies. Later in the game, things get a bit more crazy, and you'll be fighting mummies, Atlantean monsters, and it's all good fun. For the most part, Lara controls pretty well still. The game uses tank controls, but they work, and you have a ton of moves and flips you can do to help you get around the levels, as well as dodge enemies, and they're all surprisingly easy to pull off. Even the swimming sections, which are still a pain in the ass, are kinda easy to control on the Saturn. Graphically, it's not the nicest game to look at, but it's fine. The PC version is of course much better, and I'm sure by now there's probably a ton of mods that help improve things, and probably make Lara naked as well. The biggest drawback on the console versions though is that you have to find a save crystal in the levels to save your progress. These are usually around halfway through each level, and if you die, which you will, you'll lose all your progress back to that point. In the PC version, however, you can save wherever you want, which of course is a godsend with some of the platforming sections or areas where there's instant death traps everywhere. I still really like playing this game, and it got a remake for the Wii, PS3 and Xbox 360, which is also very good, and added a few additions and gameplay tweaks. Of course, the series has also been rebooted, kind of recently, with the awesome trilogy that I highly recommend, and I reckon it's probably about time for a new one to be announced, surely, so I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something soon, and I for one will look forward to it. I love me some Lara, and you should too. In the futuristic year of 2000, Lara came to the Game Boy Color with the cunningly titled Lara Croft Tomb Raider. Here, Lara hears about a group of people who are trying to find the Nightmare Stone, an ancient relic that's capable of releasing an evil god with a stupid name I can't pronounce into the world. So she sets out across 14 levels and locations to stop them. The gameplay here is actually a pretty decent representation of the 3D games, but put into a 2D perspective. It probably won't surprise many people when I say that this game is set up like the original Prince of Persia games, but with guns. You have to explore some pretty damn large levels, where you'll find all sorts of creatures and enemies that want you dead. Thankfully, you still have your trusty pistols, which Lara will again automatically point at the enemies for you to shoot their faces off. It can sometimes be harder to see enemies though, thanks to the screen size, though you're rarely attacked from off the screen, so it's kind of fair. Lara is also just as nimble as before, and she can run, jump, climb, swim, swing and backflip all over the place, and you'll be doing a lot of this to get around the levels. As you've probably guessed, you'll need to find all sorts of items, switches and keys in order to access new areas of the levels and find what you need. I do have to say that considering the Game Boy has only 2 buttons, the controls for doing all this are really very good, and it's one of those games where every movement is deliberate and the animation is super smooth, so you have to imagine it in grids. Lara has to take a certain amount of steps before she can jump, so you'll need to learn to time things correctly, but that doesn't take too long to get used to. To get your weapon out, you have to go into a pause menu and select the one you want to use, and while you're there you can also use any healing items you found, or any other item for that matter. The only thing that I couldn't figure out, which is probably very simple, was how to put away your damn guns once you're done with all the shooting. I'm sure it's very simple, but this was a bit annoying as I had to jump headfirst into a wall, which the animation makes Lara puts her guns away. I'm sure there is an easier way though. When you have your guns out, you can't climb or grab things, which makes perfect sense, and I was just too lazy to look it up. The levels here are massive and take quite a while to get through on your first go. Thankfully, the save crystals from the other games are back, so you can save your progress at various points in the stage. The game itself isn't too hard in terms of enemies and puzzles, which I think are all pretty fair. The main issue for me is that I would just often get lost. The small screen size and lack of any maps meant that I usually didn't know where the hell I was or where I needed to go. A lot of the time the levels looked kinda samey, and I wasn't really sure where I'd been and what was a new place. Graphically though, the game does look great. Other than the samey look of the levels, Lara herself looks and animates very well, and the enemies are also the same with plenty of detail. There's not much in the way of sound and music, which is a bit of a shame, and what's there isn't particularly great. But this is the same as the other games in this series, which favour ambient sound and a bit of music here and there. Now, I'll be honest, I thought this game was going to be absolute rubbish, but actually, I have to say, it's a pretty damn good game. I didn't get very far in it, only to the 3rd level so far, and it took me ages to get to that. But I really did have fun doing it, and I actually found it quite hard to put down. This is definitely a bit of a hidden gem, and one that I genuinely would recommend giving a go. Released in 1997, Turok Dinosaur Hunter became one of my favourite Nintendo 64 games, and when I got the remaster for the PS4 from those fine folk over at Night Dive Studios, I fell back in love with it, thanks to the updated controls and overall quality of life changes that they made. For those that don't know, Turok is a title, not a name. Here you play as Tal Set, a Native American who gets the moniker of Turok, a warrior that has to travel through time to some ancient lost lands, collecting keys and weapons that will help him take down the evil campaigner, who is generally being a bastard. This is all done in massive 3D levels, each of which have a number of keys to collect that will open the portals to other worlds, as well as a hidden piece of the devastating weapon, the Chronoscepter. Collecting keys is a mandatory thing you need to do to progress. However, you don't actually need to collect the Chronoscepter, though it does pack a hell of a punch. Each level will take a fair while to get through and requires a lot of exploring, as they're packed with secrets and items that you'll want to get. There's plenty of enemies that respawn after a while. You fight a lot of human hunters who work for the campaigner, as well as tribesmen, and of course a load of dinosaurs, though not as many as I would have liked to have seen. You do get raptor things, triceratops, dimetrons, and a huge T-Rex that acts as one of the bosses. Later on in the game you even get to fight robots and mutant insects. Thankfully you get an amazing assortment of weapons to take them all down with. You've got simple pistols and shotguns, as well as your trusty bow and arrows, including explosive arrows, but you also get crazy laser weapons that fire mini nukes, a rocket launcher that fires 4 rockets at a time, an awesome minigun, and of course the Chronoscepter, which is a devastating weapon that takes out most bosses in just a few hits. Though you don't get much in the way of ammo for it, unless you use cheats like I am here, so I can show you some of the cooler weapons and levels, but don't worry, I have completed this game probably 5 or 6 times in my lifetime without cheats. One of the really cool things here are the enemy deaths. a lot of which are quite comical and painful looking. The game really does have a lot of character and it's great. I still think the design of the enemies and weapons is pretty cool. Yeah, it is showing its age in terms of graphics, even in the remaster here, but there's still not really anything else like the Turok games, which is a shame. The hardest thing about it though is probably the navigation and platforming. As I've said a few times here, the levels are massive and you really do need to explore them in order to find the keys and teleporters that are often hidden quite well. You do have a map here, which does help, at least you do on the remaster, but even with this it can still be easy to get lost and wander around in circles. This can be tricky too, as enemies respawn and will use up valuable ammo which doesn't respawn. What is good though is that you can go back between levels as often as you like via a hub world. This means that you don't have to find everything on one level before moving on. In fact, sometimes you'll have to go back to previous levels to find something you've missed. One kind of strange decision is that you have lives here. Run out of lives and it's game over and you have to go back to your last save. There are tokens you can collect in the levels and 100 of these gives you an extra life, but really if you save often, which is done at specific save areas, you won't really need to worry about the lives, making them kind of redundant. And most of the time I did lose a life was because I fell off of something. You see, there is a lot of platforming to be done here, with some quite tricky jumping sections. These are actually okay to play though, but it's likely this is where you'll lose most of your lives. The bosses here are all good fun to fight, but surprisingly easy, which is a bit of a shame. As long as you keep moving and shooting, you'll be fine for most of it. Ammo does respawn in boss levels, so you can go pretty crazy and you'll always have a gun to fall back on. I still like playing this to this day, and it's one I go back to every now and then. The sequel is also really good, though I do think I prefer this one. And at the time of making this video, the remaster of the third game is just about to be released, and you can bet your ass that I'll be getting a copy of that. It's actually the only one that I don't own on the N64. I even have Rage Wars. I wonder if that'll get a remake. Anyway, if you can deal with some of the older gameplay elements of these games, then I highly recommend picking up Turok on whatever system you have. It's still a great game if you ask me, and there's not really anything else like it. And finally for today, here is Turok Battle of the Bionosaurs for the Game Boy, released in 1997, a few months after the N64 game as a sort of companion piece. This time round you have a 2D action game where you play again as Tal Set, though he looks completely different here, looking more like Joshua Fireseed from the second game. Oh well. The plot is actually pretty much the same here, with Turok needing to stop the campaigner from getting the Chronoscepter over 8 worlds, where you'll also have to do battle with the campaigner's forces and some of the local wildlife too. So you set out across some pretty large levels where you once again have a massive emphasis on exploring the expansive worlds, looking for weapons, keys and of course parts of the scepter, and this is really quite hard to do. Thankfully the gameplay is actually pretty damn good here. Turok controls well and is quite nimble, being able to run, jump and climb on most things. You also have access to pretty much all of the weapons from the 3D game. This is cool, though sadly they all basically shoot the same looking blob as ammo, and it just sometimes moves a little differently or does a bit more damage. The enemies themselves aren't too tough to take down thanks to good collision detection, and even when you're just using your knife, stabbing enemies is surprisingly easy and responsive. Exploring the worlds is also pretty fun thanks to the good controls, though I did still find it quite frustrating, mainly because there is no map and you have to rely a lot on trial and error. You don't have much screen real estate here, so you can't see far ahead, or above or below. This means there's often leaps of faith that you have to take, which usually leads to an instant death, though sometimes you will get lucky and you'll find that it's where you need to go, but there's no indication of any of this, so it really is just luck. Also, a lot of the levels look kind of the same, and you wouldn't really know that you're seeing 4 different levels here, would you? This was a bit of a shame, and though they do get mixed up a bit, it's never really anything too crazy. It's a shame because the game looks fantastic if you ask me, the graphics are all clear and the animation is excellent. I found that it was just frustrating going around in circles for nearly an hour. But hey, I know I'm crap at maze-like situations, so maybe that's on me, and maybe if I had more time to figure it all out, something would have clicked. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not saying this is a bad game. In fact, I'd actually say that it's a pretty good game and a fun one to play on the handheld. It really captures the essence of the N64 game pretty well, just without the blood and guts, and I would recommend giving this one a go. So there you go, 5 games that started out in 3D and made the move to 2D. It was cool seeing games that went this way, as usually it's the other way round. Now I did kind of struggle to think of more games that have done this, so make sure you let me know in the comments below any others that have gone from 3D to 2D. I'm guessing there's loads on the handheld systems, but I didn't want it to be full of Game Boy games, even though I love the Game Boy. But now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.